maid's daughter revealed a shocking truth about the bride's family at a wedding, making the groom cancel a $500 million deal immediately. An 11-year-old girl stood in the shadows of St. Mark's Cathedral, clutching a silver locket and a secret that could shatter lives. To the hundreds of guests, this was the wedding of the year. But to Abigail, it was a trap. As the bride walked down the aisle, Abby's voice cut through the silence. "Don't marry her." Gasps filled the cathedral. "It's all a lie," she cried, pointing at the bride and her family. In that instant, a billion-dollar legacy, a corporate empire, and a young man's future teetered on the edge of ruin. What started as a fairy tale wedding ended as a public reckoning. This is the story of how a maid's daughter exposed the truth, stopped a $500 million deal, and brought one of the city's most powerful families to their knees. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. An 11-year-old girl held the key to a $500 million lie. From her hidden perch in the choir loft, Abigail watched the river of high society flow into the pews below. To the world, this was the wedding of the year, but to Abby, it was the final tick of a clock counting down to ruin. The great organ of St. Mark's Cathedral began to breathe, its first notes a soft, hopeful melody that climbed the stone pillars toward heaven. Sunlight, fractured into 100 colors by the stained glass saints, danced across the marble aisle. It was a perfect scene, a storybook beginning for the handsome groom, Michael Anderson, and his beautiful bride, Victoria Davenport. It looked like a fairy tale, but Abby knew the truth. She knew the monster was not a dragon to be slain, but the bride herself, wrapped in a gown of ivory silk. Abby's small hand tightened around the silver locket at her throat. It was old and worn, the finish smoothed away by the thumbs of generations. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of her great-grandfather, Sergeant Thomas Forrester, in his army uniform from a war fought long ago. He had been a hero, a man who ran toward the sound of trouble when others ran away. His memory was the quiet compass of Abby's world, a constant whisper in her soul that told her to be brave, to be true, and to always stand for what was right, no matter the cost. Today, that whisper was a roar. Down at the altar, Michael Anderson stood waiting. He looked like the princes in Abby's books, with kind eyes and dark hair that fell perfectly into place. His tuxedo was tailored and sharp, but his smile was what truly set him apart. It was genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. He beamed at his parents, Robert and Carol Anderson, in the front pew, a picture of a happy, hopeful son. Abby knew that smile well. She had seen it many times over the last few months. She knew it came from a good and trusting heart, a heart that was about to be shattered. Victoria Davenport's family, the ones who had orchestrated this entire lie, sat opposite them. Her father, Harrison Davenport, was a statue of immense power and wealth. He was a tall man with a severe face and eyes as cold and gray as a winter storm. He surveyed the magnificent church not with joy, but with the silent, calculating appraisal of a general viewing a battlefield he was certain to win. He saw assets and advantages, not family and friends. Beside him, his wife Beatrice wore a strained, superior smile, her jewels glittering like chips of ice. They were the architects of this beautiful, terrible trap. Near the grand oak doors at the back, Abby's mother, Susan, stood in her simple black dress. It was the uniform of her profession. She was a maid, the head housekeeper for the Anderson family, but her service was marked by a dignity and grace that outshone many of the wealthy guests. Susan's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. There was pride for the Anderson family, who had shown her nothing but respect. But beneath it was a deep, gnawing anxiety, a fear so profound it seemed to vibrate across the cavernous space. Her eyes found Abby's in the balcony, and she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A silent, desperate plea. "Don't, Abby. Please, don't cause a scene. Don't ruin everything." But how could she not? How could she sit in silence while Michael Anderson, a man who had treated her not as the maid's daughter but as a bright young person, walked into a life sentence? Michael wasn't just her mother's employer's son. He was the one who, upon discovering her love for history, had brought her a stack of books about World War II, including one that detailed her own great-grandfather's division. He was the one who always asked about her day at school and listened, truly listened, to her answers. The Andersons were decency and warmth. The Davenports were a creeping frost. The music swelled, a triumphant announcement. The massive cathedral doors swung open. A collective sigh of admiration rippled through the guests. Victoria Davenport stood framed in the doorway, a vision of bridal perfection. Her gown was a masterpiece of lace and silk. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her smile was dazzling. But her eyes, a shade of startling blue, were fixed on Michael with an unnerving intensity. He saw a loving partner, the beginning of his forever. He had no idea he was looking at the face of his own destruction. As Victoria began her slow, regal procession down the aisle, Abby's heart hammered against her ribs. Each graceful step she took was a step closer to the end of Michael's life as he knew it. This wasn't a marriage. It was a corporate assassination dressed in white. A $500 million merger between Anderson Aeronautics and Davenport Industries was at stake. But Abby knew it was far more than a merger. It was a hostile takeover, a cold-blooded conspiracy hidden behind a veil of romance and vows. Her mind spun back through the last few months, a whirlwind of memories, small kindnesses, and chilling whispers that had led her to this single, terrifying moment. It had all started on a bright summer day when Susan had been hired as the head housekeeper at the Anderson estate. The estate, affectionately known as Northwood, was less a house and more a small, perfect world. It rested on 200 acres of manicured lawns and old-growth forests, with a grand, welcoming house that felt more like a home than a palace. Abby remembered her first time seeing it, her nose pressed against the car window, her eyes wide with a sense of wonder she had only ever found in books. "Now, remember what we talked about, sweetie," Susan had told her, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We have to be on our best behavior. This job, Abby, this job could change everything for us." And it had. The Andersons were nothing like the wealthy families Susan had worked for in the past. Robert and Carol Anderson were the heads of a powerful family, but they carried their status with a quiet humility. They were warm, down-to-earth, and treated their staff with a deep and abiding respect. When Carol Anderson first met Abby, she had crouched down to her level, her smile genuine and kind. "And who is this?" she had asked. "This is my daughter, Abigail, Mrs. Anderson," Susan said, her voice tight with nerves. "She'll be no trouble at all, I promise. She can just do her homework in the staff kitchen after school." Carol had waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense. The West Wing has a library that no one ever uses. It's quiet as a mouse in there. You can set up in there any time you like, Abigail." Her eyes twinkled. "And I happen to know the cook keeps a secret stash of chocolate chip cookies in the pantry right next to it. Just don't tell Mr. Anderson I told you." From that day forward, Abby had felt a fierce loyalty to the Andersons. She would spend her afternoons in the grand, sunlit library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and lemon polish, feeling like she had stepped into one of her favorite stories. Michael Anderson would often find her there when he came home from the office. He was the brilliant young vice president of his family's company, but he never seemed too busy to talk to her. He would ask what she was reading, and they would end up in long conversations about history, about heroes, and about the quiet courage of ordinary people. They formed an unlikely friendship, one that ignored the lines between employer and staff. Then, the Davenports had entered their peaceful world. Michael had been dating Victoria for nearly a year, and the engagement was announced shortly after Susan and Abby arrived at Northwood. The first time Abby met Victoria's parents, Harrison and Beatrice, a chill had settled deep in her bones. They had come for a weekend visit, sweeping into the grand foyer as if they were royalty inspecting a lesser castle. Beatrice, wrapped in a fur stole despite the warm autumn air, had glanced at Susan and Abby with an expression of profound indifference. "Do try to keep the child out of the main areas," she had said to Susan, her voice crisp and dismissive. "This is an adult gathering." Harrison Davenport was even more formidable. He moved with an air of absolute control, his cold eyes missing nothing. He didn't just look at things. He assessed them, silently assigning a value and finding them wanting. He never spoke to Abby, but she often felt his gaze on her, a heavy, dismissive weight that made her feel small. The contrast between the two families was as sharp as night and day. The Andersons treated their staff as part of an extended family. The Davenports treated them as invisible. Abby saw it in the way Beatrice would leave a delicate teacup on a priceless antique table, expecting it to be whisked away without a word of thanks. She saw it in the way Harrison would conduct loud, aggressive business calls in the garden, forcing the landscapers to work in silence at a distance. Michael seemed different when he was with them. The easy warmth he shared with his own family and with Abby would recede, replaced by a more formal, strained demeanor. When his fiancée and her parents were around, he became quieter, more watchful. His smiles didn't always reach his eyes. Abby once saw Harrison speak to Michael in a low, sharp tone in the hallway, his hand gripping Michael's arm. Michael's face had gone pale, and he had simply nodded, his shoulders slumping like a schoolboy who had been reprimanded. The first seed of real dread was planted one overcast afternoon about 2 months before the wedding. Abby was in the library, curled up in a large armchair by the window, watching a gentle rain paint streaks on the glass. The library doors were slightly ajar, and she heard voices from the adjoining study. Harrison Davenport and his daughter, Victoria. "You need to handle him, Victoria." Harrison's voice was a low growl, stripped of any pretense of charm. "He's getting sentimental. He's talking about putting extra protections in place for his employees in the merger agreement." "I'm trying, Daddy." Victoria's voice was smooth, but laced with an impatience Abby had never heard when she spoke to Michael. "He's just so earnest. He actually believes this merger is a partnership of equals." She laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "It is a conquest," Harrison snapped. "Anderson Aeronautics is a legacy company, fat and slow. We will absorb it, strip it of its redundancies, and triple its value. His father is a sentimental old fool, and his son is a romantic. Your job is to keep Michael focused on the wedding. Keep him focused on you. We need his signature on our version of the agreement, without his lawyers picking it apart. This family's future, your future, depends on this deal. And what if he won't sign it?" Victoria asked. "Then you make him." Harrison's voice dropped, becoming even colder. "You are a Davenport. You will remind him that a happy marriage is built on trust. Tell him that questioning the contracts is questioning his trust in you. Be charming, be loving, be whatever you need to be. But do not fail. Is that clear?" "Yes, Father," Victoria said. Abby felt as if a block of ice had formed in her stomach. It didn't sound like a loving conversation about a wedding. It sounded like a conspiracy, a cold, heartless strategy. A few weeks later, a second, uglier incident confirmed her fears. Beatrice Davenport had misplaced a diamond bracelet. A frantic search of the guest's suite yielded nothing. Beatrice, without a shred of evidence, immediately suggested that Susan was responsible. She was the last one tidying the room, Beatrice had announced in the main hall, her voice carrying for all to hear. "It's always the help, isn't it? You try to be generous, you let them into your home, and this is the gratitude you receive." Susan was humiliated. Her face went white as she stood before the Davenports, trying to defend her integrity. "Mrs. Davenport, I assure you, I would never." "Of course you would deny it," Beatrice scoffed. At that moment, Michael's mother, Carol Anderson, came down the grand staircase. She took in the scene, and her warm expression hardened. "Beatrice, that is a vile accusation," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Susan has been with us for months and is one of the most honest people I have ever met." "You're too soft, Carol," Harrison said calmly, stepping forward. "In our world, you can't afford to be so trusting." "This is my world, Harrison," Carol replied, her gaze unwavering. "And in my home, I will not have my staff, my friends, treated this way. We will find your bracelet, but you will apologize to Susan." The bracelet was later found in the pocket of Beatrice's own cashmere coat. She offered a brief, insincere apology, but the damage was done. Abby saw the shame and fear in her mother's eyes. It filled her with a cold anger. The Davenports weren't just rude, they were cruel. They were bullies who enjoyed the power they held over others. And they were about to become Michael's family. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle had clicked into place just 1 week ago. It was late at night, long after Abby was supposed to be asleep. A sore throat had woken her, and she had crept downstairs to the main kitchen to get a glass of water. As she passed the closed doors of the conservatory, she heard a voice. It was Harrison Davenport. He was on the phone, his voice a low, triumphant murmur. Abby knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, but the memory of his conversation with Victoria pushed her forward. She pressed her ear to the cool glass of the door. "The arrangements are finalized," Harrison said. "Dr. Evans is on board. He has the prepared reports." There was a pause. Abby held her breath, her heart starting to pound. No, he suspects nothing. He's completely besotted with Victoria and the wedding. As soon as the papers are signed and the merger is legally complete, we wait 3 weeks. Just long enough for it to look organic. Another pause. His next words made Abby's blood run cold. Victoria will initiate the process. She'll cite increasingly erratic behavior, signs of a breakdown. She'll mention his past struggles with anxiety after his grandfather's death. A clever touch adds credibility. Dr. Evans' reports will back it all up. We'll petition for a temporary conservatorship. The board will be forced to act. With Victoria as his wife and our new controlling interest from the merger, we'll have the votes. She'll be granted medical power of attorney. We take control of everything. Anderson Aeronautics will be ours, free and clear. Abby felt dizzy. She pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself. They were going to frame Michael. They were going to make it seem like he was mentally unstable. They were going to steal his company, his legacy, everything his family had built. This wasn't just a takeover. It was the complete and utter demolition of a good man. His grandfather spent his last few years in a private facility. You know, Harrison continued with a sickening chuckle. A genetic predisposition to mental fragility is not a hard story to sell. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, it will be far too late. The company will be restructured under our banner, and Michael will be resting comfortably somewhere out of the way. Abby backed away from the door, her hands trembling so hard she could barely control them. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. It was a monstrous plan, evil in its corporate precision. They weren't just marrying Michael, they were plotting to bury him. She had tried to tell her mother. The next morning, she had found Susan in the linen closet, her voice a frantic whisper as she recounted every terrible word. Susan had listened, her face growing paler and paler. "Abby, you must promise me you will never repeat that to anyone," Susan had said, her eyes wide with a terror Abby had never seen before. "These are powerful, dangerous people. They could destroy us. They could say you're a liar, that I put you up to it to get money. We would lose this job, our home, everything. We have to pretend you heard nothing." "But Mom, we have to warn Michael," Abby pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "And how do we do that?" Susan cried, her voice cracking. "A maid and her daughter against Harrison Davenport? He would crush us without a second thought. We have to be smart, Abby. We have to stay quiet. We have to survive." But Abby couldn't stay quiet. The weight of the secret was a physical burden, pressing down on her chest. The image of her great-grandfather, his gaze so clear and honorable from the locket, shamed her silence. He wouldn't have stayed quiet. He wouldn't have let bullies win. 2 days before the wedding, she had tried to approach Michael herself. She found him in the garage, admiring his father's restored vintage airplane, a passion they shared. "Michael," Abby began, her heart pounding. "Can I talk to you about something important?" "Of course, Abby. What's on your mind, co-pilot?" he asked with his usual warmth. Before Abby could form the words, Victoria had appeared at the door, a brilliant, false smile on her face. "Michael, darling, we have the tasting with the caterer to finalize." She saw Abby, and her smile tightened. "Is the child bothering you?" "Not at all," Michael said. "Abby was just about to tell me something." "It can wait," Victoria said dismissively, looping her arm through Michael's. She gave Abby a look that was both a warning and a dismissal. "Run along now. The adults have very important things to discuss." Abby looked at Michael, hoping he would insist. But Michael, already stressed and pulled in 1,000 directions by the wedding plans, just gave her an apologetic smile. "We'll talk later. Okay, champ?" The chance was lost. And now, there were no more chances. Only this one, final, heart-stopping moment. Back in the choir loft, the music softened. Victoria had reached the altar. She handed her bouquet to her maid of honor and turned to face Michael. He took her hands, his smile so full of love and trust it was painful to watch. To everyone else, they were the perfect couple. To Abby, it was a lamb turning to face the butcher's knife. The officiant, a kind-faced man with white hair, began to speak, his calm, measured words washing over the silent congregation. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company, to join together Michael Robert Anderson and Victoria and Davenport in holy matrimony. Abby's hands were slick with sweat. The locket felt heavy, like a stone, against her chest. She could see her great-grandfather's face in her mind, not smiling, but serious, his eyes seeming to peer right into her soul. "Courage, kid," he seemed to say. "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right when you're terrified." She had no proof. She had no evidence. Just the words she had overheard, the words of an 11-year-old girl against one of the most powerful men in the country. Her mother was right. They could ruin them. They could destroy their lives. But then she looked at Michael's trusting face, so full of love and hope for a future that she knew was a lie. She looked at his parents, Carol and Robert, their faces shining with pride. And she knew, with a certainty that burned away all her fear, that she could not live with herself if she stayed silent. She would rather be ruined for telling the truth than be safe with a lie. The officiant reached the pivotal moment. His voice echoed slightly in the hushed cathedral. "If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The traditional words hung in the air. A profound, sacred silence followed. 1 second, 2, 3. The world seemed to hold its breath. The officiant smiled, ready to proceed. It was now or never. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Abby pushed herself to her feet. She gripped the heavy oak railing of the choir loft to steady her shaking legs. She opened her mouth, and with every ounce of strength in her small body, she screamed, "Don't marry her." The words ripped through the holy silence like a thunderclap. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, rose from the guests below. Every single head swiveled and then craned upward, a sea of confused and startled faces searching for the source of the sacrilege. Down below, her mother Susan looked as if she might collapse, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. At the altar, Michael and Victoria froze. Victoria's perfect smile vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated fury before it settled into a mask of confused innocence. Michael's face was a study in utter bewilderment. He squinted, trying to see who had shouted. Harrison and Beatrice Davenport, sitting in the front pew, turned around. When Harrison's cold eyes found Abby, his expression morphed into a look of such venomous rage that it felt like a physical blow. It was a look that promised utter ruin. "Stop!" Abby yelled again, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "You can't marry her, Michael. It's all a lie." The church erupted into a chaotic symphony of whispers. "Who is that girl? What is she saying? My God, it's the housekeeper's daughter." Victoria took a step toward Michael, trying to take his arm in a show of unity. "Michael, darling, don't listen," she said, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of concern. "It's just a child. She's confused." "I'm not confused," Abby shouted, pointing a shaking finger down at the altar, her aim directed at the bride and her father. "They're lying. Her whole family is lying. They don't care about you. They just want your company." Michael looked from Victoria's strained face up to Abby's desperate one. His brow furrowed. He knew Abby. He knew this quiet, serious girl who loved history books and spoke with a wisdom beyond her years. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a child seeking attention. This was something else entirely. "Abby, what are you talking about?" Michael called up, his voice steady despite the shock that was radiating through him. Harrison Davenport shot to his feet, his face a thunderous mask. "This is outrageous. Security, get up there and remove that child immediately. She is hysterical and needs to be disciplined." 2 security guards in dark suits started moving toward the stone staircase that led to the loft. "No, wait," Michael said, holding up a hand. The guard stopped. All eyes, including Victoria's, were on him. In the middle of his own wedding, in front of hundreds of the most influential people in the city, he was taking control. "Let her speak." Harrison's face went rigid. "Michael, this is absurd. We are not going to halt this wedding to indulge the fantasies of a little girl. She is a guest in this church, Harrison." Michael's voice was now as cold as the older man's. "And she is my friend. She will be heard." He looked back up at Abby, his eyes pleading for an explanation that made sense. "Tell me what you mean, Abby." Abby's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. The entire world had shrunk to this single, terrifying moment. "I heard him," she said, her voice gaining power as the truth flooded out. I heard your father, Victoria. Mr. Davenport. He was on the phone. He has a plan to take over Anderson Aeronautics after you're married. A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the pews. Beatrice Davenport leaped to her feet. This is slander. The child is an impertinent liar, she shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Susan. You put her up to this. You saw a chance for a payday, you wretched woman. You will be fired for this. Susan shrank back, tears of humiliation and terror streaming down her face. My mom has nothing to do with it. Abby defended her fiercely. I heard it myself. They're going to say you're having a breakdown, Michael. They have a doctor who wrote fake reports about you. They're going to get a conservatorship and medical power of attorney. They want to take everything from you and have you resting comfortably somewhere. She repeated the cruel, chilling words Harrison had used. At the altar, Michael flinched as if he had been physically struck. His eyes, wide and searching, moved from Abby to Victoria and then to Harrison. He was the vice president of a major corporation. He understood the language of power, of legal maneuvering, of corporate warfare. The words conservatorship and power of attorney were not the stuff of a child's fantasy. They were boardroom weapons. Victoria was pale as a ghost. Michael, darling, you can't possibly believe this. It's insane. She's making it all up. She laughed, a high, nervous sound that convinced no one. A conservatorship? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Is it? Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. He looked directly at his bride. He saw the slight tremor in her hand. He saw the way her eyes darted toward her father, a flicker of a glance looking for instructions. In that instant, the loving fiancé he thought he knew began to dissolve, replaced by a stranger. Where did you hear this, Abby? Michael asked, his gaze unwavering. In the conservatory, Abby said immediately. Last week, late at night, he was on the phone with someone. He said your grandfather died in a private facility and that a genetic predisposition to mental fragility is not a hard story to sell. This final detail was a dagger plunged deep. It was a private, painful part of the Anderson family history, known only to their innermost circle. It was not something a child could ever invent or overhear by chance. A gasp rippled through the front pews where the Anderson family and close friends sat. They knew it was true. Michael's face lost all its color. He slowly pulled his hands out of Victoria's grasp. She reached for them again, a desperate gesture, but he stepped back, creating a small but undeniable chasm between them. Harrison Davenport knew he was losing control. He strode into the aisle, his voice booming with feigned authority. This has gone on long enough. This wedding is being sabotaged by a delusional child and her greedy, incompetent mother. We will not stand here and be insulted. Michael, Victoria, let us proceed. Ignore this nonsense. But Michael wasn't looking at the officiant. He was looking at Harrison, and for the first time, he was seeing him clearly. He saw the ruthless ambition, the calculation, the absolute lack of empathy behind the mask of civility. He saw a predator. You know, Abby, Michael said, his voice now resonating with a newfound, terrible clarity, his shock hardening into cold fury. There is one problem with your story. Abby's heart sank. Had she gotten a detail wrong? Was he not going to believe her after all? The problem, Michael continued, his eyes locked on Harrison, is that you have no proof. Harrison smirked, a flicker of victory in his cold eyes. Exactly. She has no proof. It is the word of a servant's child against ours. That's where you're wrong. Abby's voice rang out from the balcony, clear as a bell. I do have proof. The smirk on Harrison's face vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. What? I know you don't trust anyone with your important papers, Abby said, remembering snippets of conversations she'd overheard between the staff about Mr. Davenport's obsessive secrecy. You keep your most important files with you. They're in your leather briefcase, the one with the silver buckle. Harrison's hand instinctively went to his side, but the briefcase wasn't there. It's not with you now, Abby continued, her confidence surging. Because you're at a wedding. You gave it to your assistant when you arrived. I saw him. He took it to the little room behind the altar. The vestry. He said you wanted the merger documents ready for a celebratory signing at the reception. Michael turned his head slowly and looked toward the small, carved door to the vestry. His father, Robert Anderson, was now standing, his face grim. In that briefcase, Abby pressed on, her voice filled with absolute conviction. "There's a dark blue folder. It's labeled AA Contingency. Inside it are the fake medical reports from Dr. Evans, and the draft of the conservatorship petition, and all the notes about the plan." Harrison Davenport was frozen. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty gray. The look in his eyes was no longer fury. It was the trapped, desperate look of a king whose castle was crumbling around him. That look was all the confirmation Michael, and everyone else, needed. He turned to his best man. "Hold my ring." Then he looked at the two security guards who had been about to escort Abby out. "You two, go to the vestry. Bring me Mr. Davenport's briefcase. Do not let anyone stop you." "Michael, you can't be serious," Victoria pleaded, finally grabbing his arm. "You're going to humiliate my family based on this fairy tale from a child?" Michael looked down at her hand on his arm, her grip like a claw. He then looked back up to her face, his expression utterly devoid of the love that had been there only moments before. "Get your hand off me," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the terrifying weight of finality. Victoria let go as if she'd been burned. The guards, loyal to the Andersons, nodded and moved swiftly toward the vestry. Harrison took a step to block them, his body rigid with desperation. "I forbid it. That is my private property." "Not anymore," Michael's father, Robert Anderson, said, stepping forward to stand beside his son. His voice, usually so gentle, was like steel. "Not when you are using it to plot the destruction of my son and my family." The guards bypassed Harrison and disappeared into the vestry. The entire church held its breath. The silence was thick and heavy, 1,000 times more profound than before. Abby remained standing at the balcony railing, her knuckles white. Her mother was openly sobbing now, a mixture of abject terror and a strange, dawning pride. After what felt like an eternity, the two guards emerged. One of them was holding a handsome, dark leather briefcase with a silver buckle. They walked to the altar and handed it to Michael. He placed it on the small table meant for the unity candle. His hands were perfectly steady. He looked at Harrison, whose face was now a ghastly shade of white. "What is the combination?" "I will not tell you," he hissed. "It doesn't matter," Michael said calmly. He turned to his father's head of security, a man named Peterson who was standing in the pews. "Peterson, I imagine you can open this." The burly man started forward. Harrison knew he was defeated. His shoulders slumped. "December 30th, 88, he mumbled, the numbers tasting like ash in his mouth. With hundreds of pairs of eyes watching him, Michael Anderson knelt down. He carefully turned the dials on the briefcase lock. Click, click, click. He lifted the latches, and the case sprang open. He did not have to search for long. Right on top was a dark blue folder. Its label was typed in stark black letters. A Contingency. Michael lifted the folder out. His expression was grim, his face etched with a pain deeper than any physical wound. He opened it. He stood there for a long, silent moment, reading the top page. Then the second, then the third. The life he had imagined, the love he had believed in, all of it turned to smoke and ash right there before the altar of God. Finally, he looked up. His gaze swept over the crowd, over the Davenports, who now looked like cornered animals, and finally, up to the choir loft where a small, blonde girl stood watching, her heart in her eyes. A single tear of betrayal traced a path down Michael's cheek, but his voice, when he spoke, was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a man who had seen the truth. "This wedding," he announced, his words echoing through the silent cathedral, "is over." He turned to Harrison, Beatrice, and Victoria, his eyes blazing with a righteous fire. "As for you," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "I suggest you find a very, very good lawyer. You are going to need one." He then looked to his father's security chief. "Mr. Peterson, please escort the Davenports off this property. And call the police. I'd like to report a conspiracy to commit fraud on a scale I'm sure they'll find fascinating." The dam of silence broke, and chaos was a tidal wave. It crashed over the pristine, hallowed halls of the cathedral, sweeping away the carefully constructed artifice of the day. The guests, a collection of the city's elite, were on their feet, their whispers turning into a roar of shocked conversation. Cell phones emerged from tailored pockets and designer handbags, their screens lighting up like a constellation of tiny, hungry eyes. The story was already breaking, a scandal of epic proportions delivered directly into the palms of their hands. Mr. Peterson, a man of quiet efficiency, and another guard flanked the disgraced Davenport family. Harrison, his face a mottled red of pure rage, seemed ready to explode. "You will regret this, Anderson," he spat, his voice shaking with fury as Mr. Peterson firmly guided him down the aisle. "I will sue you for everything you have. Slander, defamation. You have no idea the forces you are messing with." Michael stood his ground at the altar, a solitary figure of quiet strength. He didn't flinch. He simply watched them go, his expression unreadable. Beatrice was weeping, not with sorrow, but with the high-pitched, theatrical sobs of a woman whose social standing had just been publicly executed. Victoria was a ghost, her eyes vacant, her body limp as if her strings had been cut. She stumbled after her parents, her beautiful wedding gown trailing behind her in the dust, a sad, discarded costume from a play that had ended in disaster. The journey down the aisle was a walk of shame. The same path she had walked in triumph. The Davenports now walked in utter humiliation. Every eye was on them, judging, whispering, recording. As the great oak doors slammed shut behind them, a strange quiet fell over the church once more. It was not the reverent silence of a wedding, but the stunned, awkward silence of a disaster's aftermath. The officiant, looking utterly bewildered, slowly closed his book. Michael finally took a deep breath, the first he seemed to have taken since Abby's shout. His shoulders, held so rigidly, slumped just a little. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of what had just happened. His wedding day had become a crime scene. His heart, which had been so full of love just minutes before, was now a hollow cavern of betrayal. His eyes scanned the crowd of stunned faces until they found what they were looking for. High up in the choir loft, Abby was still standing, a small, brave soldier on her lonely perch. Next to her, Susan was huddled, her face buried in her hands. Without a word to anyone else, Michael turned. He walked not out of the church, but toward the stone staircase that led to the balcony. The guests parted for him, their whispers following him like a wake. Abby watched him approach, her own courage beginning to falter. Now that the shouting was over, the fear crept back in. Had she done the right thing? Or had she just ruined everything for everyone? The steps were steep, but Michael climbed them with a determined stride. When he reached the top, he found Abby and Susan huddled together. Susan looked up, her eyes red and swollen with tears, a look of profound apology and fear on her face. "Mr. Anderson." "Michael, I am so sorry," Susan whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "I tried to stop her. I told her to be quiet. Please, whatever happens, don't blame her. This is my fault." Michael looked at the terrified woman, and his expression softened. All the ice, all the fury he had felt, melted away, replaced by a deep, weary gratitude. "Susan," he said, his voice gentle, "there is nothing to be sorry for. You should be proud." He then turned his attention to Abby. The little girl stood frozen, her big eyes filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Michael knelt down, bringing himself to Abby's level, the expensive tuxedo wrinkling on the dusty stone floor. He didn't care. He reached out and gently took Abby's small, trembling hands in his own. "Abby," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Abby shook her head, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. I just didn't want them to hurt you." "Hurt me?" Michael let out a short, watery laugh. "Oh, Abby, you didn't just stop them from hurting me. You saved me. You saved my company. You saved my family's legacy, everything my father and grandfather ever built." He squeezed her hands. "The words, thank you, aren't big enough for what you did. What you did today, it was an act of incredible courage." Abby looked down at her worn sneakers, then back up at the kind face of the man in the tuxedo. "My great-grandpa was a soldier," she said quietly, her hand going to the locket at her neck. "He always said you have to stand up to bullies, no matter how big they are." Michael's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, they were tears of profound gratitude. "Well, your great-grandfather was a very wise man," he said, his voice cracking. "And you, Abigail Forrester, are a hero. Just like him." He pulled the little girl into a hug. Abby hesitated for a moment, then wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crisp fabric of his jacket. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his wedding day, Michael felt a connection more real and profound than anything he had ever felt with Victoria. It was a bond forged not in romance, but in truth and courage. Downstairs, the cathedral had descended into a state of managed chaos. Robert and Carol Anderson, their initial shock now replaced by a protective, steely resolve, moved through the crowd with quiet authority. Robert addressed the guests, his voice firm and steady, thanking them for their attendance and asking for their discretion, a request he knew was futile but necessary. Carol, meanwhile, moved toward the back of the church where her staff was gathered, her expression one of deep concern. She found the wedding planner, a woman pale with shock, and gave her a series of calm, clear instructions. The $500 a plate reception was to be canceled, the food donated to local shelters, and the staff were to be paid for the full day, with a generous bonus for their trouble. While his parents managed the immediate fallout, Michael remained in the choir loft with Abby and Susan. The weight of his own heartbreak was immense, a crushing pressure in his chest. Yet, looking at Abby's wide, worried eyes and Susan's tear-streaked face, he knew his first responsibility was to them. They had risked everything for him. He owed them more than just his gratitude. He owed them his protection. "We need to get you both out of here," Michael said, his voice low and urgent. "The press will be here any minute. They'll be like sharks." He led them down a narrow, winding back staircase used by the choir, away from the prying eyes of the remaining guests. The stone steps echoed with their footsteps, a stark, lonely sound after the drama in the main hall. They emerged into a quiet, sun-dappled side garden, an oasis of peace amidst the turmoil. Michael's father, Robert, was already there, waiting for them by a black town car that had been discreetly pulled around. "The car is ready," Robert said. He put a gentle, reassuring hand on Susan's shoulder. "Susan, you and Abby will come back to Northwood with us. You are not safe on your own right now. The Davenports are ruthless, and they will be looking for someone to blame." Susan shook her head, overwhelmed. "Mr. Anderson, we can't. We've caused enough trouble. We'll just pack our things in." "Absolutely not," Carol Anderson said, joining them in the garden, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You are not in trouble, Susan. You are under our protection. You and Abby are family now. That's final." Abby looked up at the Andersons. She saw the stress and pain etched on their faces, the wreckage of what was supposed to be the happiest day of their son's life. And yet, their primary concern was for a housekeeper and her daughter. It was a moment of profound decency, a kindness so deep it seemed to shine. They were whisked away from the cathedral just as the first news vans, with their towering satellite antennas, began to arrive, their tires screeching as they jostled for position on the street. The story of the canceled wedding exploded across the internet. It was a perfect storm of wealth, scandal, and betrayal, a real-life drama that eclipsed any fictional soap opera. The video clips, filmed on guests' phones, went viral. Abby's high, clear cry of "Don't marry her" became an instant, iconic soundbite. The image of Michael Anderson opening the briefcase, his face a mask of dawning horror, was plastered across every news website and social media feed. The narrative was clear and devastating. The Davenports were cast as the villains of a Victorian melodrama, their corporate greed and personal cruelty laid bare for the world to see. Harrison Davenport's carefully cultivated image as a titan of industry was shattered, replaced by that of a scheming, ruthless monster. Victoria, the beautiful bride, was now seen as a cold, calculating accomplice, a modern-day Lady Macbeth. In contrast, Abby was hailed as a hero. News outlets scrambled to find out who she was. They called her the 11-year-old angel, the million-dollar whistleblower. They unearthed the story of her great-grandfather, Sergeant Thomas Forrester, and his wartime heroism, painting a picture of a legacy of courage passed down through generations. She was the brave, small girl who had stood up to the giants and won. For the next few days, the Anderson estate, Northwood, became a fortress. A security detail was hired to patrol the gates, keeping the relentless hordes of reporters at bay. Inside, a strange new reality took hold. Susan and Abby were no longer staff. They were honored guests, living in a beautifully appointed suite in the West Wing, the very wing that housed the library Abby loved so much. Carol Anderson insisted they eat their meals with the family in the main dining room, an experience that was at first deeply uncomfortable for Susan. She had spent her life serving in rooms like this, not being served. But the Andersons, with their quiet, persistent kindness, slowly chipped away at her professional reserve. Robert would ask for her opinion on the news coverage. Carol would talk to her about the gardens. And Michael treated Abby as his personal savior. He spent hours with her, not dwelling on the wedding, but talking about her school, her dreams, and her hero great-grandfather. He brought her a rare, leather-bound book about Sergeant Forster's regiment, a first edition he had tracked down from a collector. "He would have been so proud of you, Abby," Michael told her, his voice full of sincerity. Amidst this strange, quiet interlude, the world outside was in an uproar. The police had indeed been called. Armed with the contents of the briefcase, the fraudulent medical reports, the detailed plans for the conservatorship, the incriminating emails, the district attorney's office launched a full-scale investigation into Davenport Industries. The story was no longer just about a canceled wedding. It was about corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted illegal confinement. The FBI became involved, looking into potential stock market manipulation tied to the merger. The fallout was swift and brutal. The board of directors of Davenport Industries, facing a catastrophic stock collapse and a public relations nightmare, forced Harrison Davenport to resign. Several key executives, implicated by the documents in the briefcase, were fired. The $500 million merger with Anderson Aeronautics was, of course, dead. But more than that, the Davenport empire, built on a foundation of ruthless aggression and fear, began to crumble under the weight of its own corruption. The family was facing not just financial ruin, but the very real possibility of prison time. One rainy afternoon, about 2 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, Carol Anderson found Abby curled up in her favorite armchair in the library, the first edition book open in her lap. "There you are," Carol said with a warm smile. "I was looking for you. Your mother and I were just having a talk." Abby sat up. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is more than okay," Carol said, sitting on the ottoman in front of her. "Abby, my husband and I, we have been talking a lot about the future, about our company, about our family, and about you and your mother." She took a breath. "What you did at the church, it was a wake-up call for us. We've been so focused on business, on mergers and profits, that we almost lost sight of what really matters. Integrity, courage, doing the right thing, no matter the cost." Carol's eyes shone with a new purpose. "We've decided to start a foundation, an educational fund dedicated to promoting ethics and courage in young people. It will provide scholarships for kids who, like you, show incredible moral character. It will fund programs that teach the importance of truth and integrity." She paused, her smile widening. "And we want to name it the Abigail Forster Foundation for Courage." Abby's jaw dropped. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked around the grand library. A foundation. In her name. It was more than she could have ever imagined. But my name is just Abby," she said in a small voice. "You are Abigail Forster," Carol said gently. "And that is a name that will now be synonymous with bravery." She reached out and took Abby's hands. "And speaking of names, your mother has told me that your lease is up on your apartment at the end of the month. She was planning on looking for a new place for you both." Carol's expression grew serious, but her eyes were filled with a hopeful, tender light. "Abby, this big house, it's always felt a little too empty, even with all the staff. Robert and I have been rattling around in it for years. What it needs is more life. What it needs is a family." She squeezed Abby's hands. "Your mother is one of the most capable, intelligent, and decent women I have ever met. We've offered her a new position, not as a housekeeper, but as the head administrator of the new foundation. It's a huge job, and it comes with a salary to match." Carol took another breath. "But more than that, we were hoping that maybe you and your mom would consider making this your home. Permanently. Not as guests. Not as staff. As part of our family." Abby stared into Carol Anderson's kind, hopeful eyes. This brilliant, powerful woman wasn't just offering her a job or a place to live. She was offering them a life. A future. A family. She thought of her mom, how the lines of worry on her face had softened over the last 2 weeks, replaced by a relaxed, genuine smile. She thought of Michael, who felt more like a big brother than a boss's son. She thought of this incredible house, not as a place of work, but as a place of safety, warmth, and belonging. She didn't have to think about the answer. It was already in her heart, full and shining. I think, Abby said, a huge, radiant smile breaking across her face, a smile that chased away all the shadows of the past few weeks. We would like that very much. Carol's answering smile was as bright and brilliant as the sun that was now breaking through the clouds outside, sending shafts of light pouring through the library windows. She pulled Abby into a hug, a real, heartfelt embrace. And in that moment, in a room filled with books about history and heroes, a new story was written. A new family was born. It wasn't a family forged by contracts or by blood, but one built on something far stronger. The brave, true heart of an 11-year-old girl who understood the legacy of her great-grandfather and dared to speak the truth, no matter the cost. The story of the wedding was over, but the story of their lives, together, was just beginning. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.